After he finally left, I immediately texted Josephine and sent her the video file, explaining what happened and what time it occurred. She responded within 10 minutes saying this was a clear violation, and she would add it to our documentation for the court. Late that night after my friend went to bed, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started writing about everything that happened. I wasn't planning to share it with anyone or post it online. I just needed to get my thoughts organized and clear in my own mind. I wrote about the airport, the hotel room, waking up at 2 in the morning and serving the divorce papers in the conference room. I wrote down a new rule for myself in bold letters at the bottom of the page. No defending my choices to people who weren't there. No explaining what I saw or felt to anyone except through proper legal channels. Just facts and evidence and letting the documentation speak for itself. Thursday morning, I drove to the office building where Jerry worked and met Ronan in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor. A compliance officer sat next to him with a laptop open and ready to take notes on everything I said. They asked me to walk through the entire Hawaii trip from the beginning, and I stuck to specific facts and timeline details without adding emotional commentary or crying, even though my throat felt tight the whole time. Ronan asked detailed questions about when Jerry first mentioned having a work wife, when I noticed the restaurant reservation had been changed to 3 people, and the exact wording Jerry used when booking the couple's massage for himself and Sasha. I answered each question directly, and watched the compliance officer type everything into her laptop. They asked about every single charge on the company card, and I provided the dates, amounts, and the descriptions Jerry had entered for each one. The interview lasted almost 2 hours, and by the end my hands were cramped from gripping the edge of my chair. That afternoon, Ronan sent me an email asking me to provide the original photo files with full metadata intact and copies of the credit card statements showing each charge. I logged into my cloud storage and downloaded everything to a folder, then uploaded the files to the secure portal link he provided. The progress bar moved slowly as the photos and documents transferred, and I sat there watching it climb to 100%, while feeling completely exposed, but also determined to see this through the right way. Friday morning, Josephine called to tell me that Sebastian Page, Jerry's attorney, had filed a motion claiming I was causing reputational harm by making private marital issues public in his workplace. She said not to worry because she was already preparing a detailed response explaining that company card fraud and workplace boundary violations were legitimate compliance concerns, not private marital disputes. She told me the motion was a standard defensive tactic and the judge would see right through it. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to Janelle's office for my first therapy session and sat in a chair across from her while she asked me about what brought me in. I told her about Hawaii and the conference room and everything that happened since, and she listened without interrupting or looking shocked. She taught me some grounding techniques for when I felt my anxiety spike, like focusing on 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch. We talked about the gaslighting patterns in Jerry's behavior over the past year, how he'd been slowly convincing me that my reactions were crazy when they were actually normal responses to real violations. She said my reaction wasn't excessive or unreasonable, that anyone would find what happened devastating and my choice to leave was completely valid. I left her office feeling raw but also lighter, like someone had finally confirmed that I wasn't making this bigger than it needed to be. That evening, while going through old message threads for the legal file, I found texts from late at night where Sasha mocked me to Jerry. She called me uptight and boring, said I didn't understand modern workplace culture, and that successful people had different relationship rules. She joked about me being jealous and said Jerry deserved someone who appreciated him properly. I read through the messages twice to make sure I understood them correctly, then forwarded the entire thread to both Josephine and Ronan with a brief note explaining when these were sent. This wasn't just about the company card anymore. This was evidence that both of them knew exactly what they were doing and thought it was funny that I didn't catch on sooner. Thursday morning, my phone rang with Ronan's number and I picked up immediately. He told me that Sasha filed a formal counter-complaint claiming I created a hostile work environment by publicly exposing her relationship with Jerry in front of senior leadership. I felt my gut twist but stayed quiet while he explained the process. He said this was a standard defensive move, that HR sees it all the time when someone gets caught violating policy. Josephine called me back within 20 minutes after I texted her about the counter-complaint, and she sounded completely calm. She explained that Sasha's complaint wouldn't hold up because my actions were reporting legitimate financial misconduct, not targeting her personally. The company card misuse was real, documented, and my business to report since Jerry used marital assets and company resources. She told me not to worry, that this was exactly the kind of predictable response she expected from someone trying to shift blame. Over the next week, Josephine worked on crafting detailed responses that clearly separated my personal divorce issues from the workplace policy violations Jerry committed. She showed me drafts where she outlined how the company card fraud was a compliance matter, not a marital dispute, and how my report to HR followed proper channels for financial misconduct. She explained that keeping these 2 lanes completely separate protected me from looking vindictive, while still holding the company accountable for real violations. I read through her responses 3 times, noting how carefully she worded everything to focus on facts and policy, rather than emotions or revenge. The following Tuesday, we went to court for the temporary orders hearing. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom for 40 minutes watching other cases get called while my hands shook in my lap. When our turn came, I followed Josephine into the courtroom and sat at the table while she presented our requests for mutual restraining orders and temporary spousal support. Jerry's attorney argued that I was being unreasonable and vindictive, that Jerry needed access to marital funds for his own legal fees and living expenses. The judge listened to both sides without much expression, then granted mutual restraining orders prohibiting either of us from contacting each other except through attorneys. She set temporary spousal support at $800 a month, which was way less than I'd hoped for, but enough to help with basic expenses. Josephine whispered that this was actually pretty standard for temporary orders, and we could push for more in the final settlement. I left the courthouse feeling like I had some protection and breathing room, even if it wasn't everything I wanted. That afternoon, I met with a realtor to start apartment hunting. I gave her my budget based on my own income plus the temporary support, and she pulled up listings that were way smaller and less nice than the house Jerry and I shared. We drove around looking at one-bedroom apartments in safe neighborhoods, and I kept adjusting my expectations downward with each place. The third apartment had stained carpet and a tiny kitchen, but the building was secure and the rent fit my budget. I focused on finding something safe and affordable rather than trying to match what I was leaving behind. The realtor seemed to understand without me having to explain why I was doing this alone. 3 weeks after the conference room confrontation, Ronan called again to tell me that Jerry had been placed on paid administrative leave while they completed their investigation. I asked what that meant, and he explained that Jerry would stay home with full pay until HR and compliance finished reviewing all the evidence and interviewing relevant people. It felt like partial validation, proof that the company was taking this seriously, but I knew paid leave wasn't the same as being fired. Ronan couldn't promise what the final outcome would be, said the investigation could take another few weeks. I thanked him and hung up feeling like this was progress but not victory. A formal letter arrived from Sebastian the next Monday, printed on expensive letterhead and carefully worded by lawyers. The letter expressed regret for any distress caused to me during this difficult time, acknowledged that mistakes were made in judgment, and hoped we could move forward professionally. I read it twice looking for any actual admission of wrongdoing, but found none. It was pure legal language designed to sound apologetic, without admitting anything that could be used in court. I forwarded it to Josephine without responding directly, following her advice that any personal communication with Jerry or his attorney could be twisted and used against me later. She replied within an hour saying this was exactly what she expected and to ignore it. Friday morning, I got an alert from my bank app showing several large transfers from our joint savings account. I opened the app and saw that Jerry had moved $12,000 out the day before the temporary orders took effect. I called Josephine immediately, and she told me to screenshot everything and send it to her right away. She said she would file an emergency motion to freeze the remaining funds and force Jerry to account for where the money went. I sat on my friend's couch staring at the transactions, feeling the betrayal cut even deeper, knowing he'd been planning his exit strategy while pretending to be reasonable. He'd taken that money knowing the court was about to restrict access, which meant he'd been thinking several steps ahead while I was just trying to survive. That weekend, I heard through mutual friends that people at Jerry's office were spreading rumors about me. They said I was a vindictive ex trying to destroy him over a midlife crisis, that I couldn't handle him having female friends at work, that I made everything public because I wanted attention. The rumors hurt more than I expected, knowing people were talking about me without knowing what really happened. But I refused to defend myself on social media or through the gossip chain. I trusted that the evidence would speak louder than workplace speculation, that HR had the receipts and photos and would make their own judgment. Josephine told me not to engage with any of it, that responding would only make me look defensive. Tuesday afternoon, I went back to Janelle's office for my second therapy session. She asked how I was handling everything, and I told her about the counter-complaint, the court hearing, the rumors, the money Jerry took. She listened and then helped me work through the grief and anger without letting them take over completely. She taught me to notice my triggers, like when I started spiraling into worst-case scenarios, or replaying the Hawaii trip over and over. She showed me how to respond to those triggers instead of just reacting, how to pause and choose what to do next rather than getting swept away by emotion. I left her office feeling raw, but also more in control of myself than I'd felt since everything started. Wednesday morning, I went back to the realtor and told her I wanted to put in an application for the apartment with the stained carpet. She walked me through the paperwork and I paid the deposit with money from my separate checking account, the one Jerry never had access to. Signing that lease felt bittersweet, like I was claiming my independence, but also admitting that the life I thought I was building with Jerry was completely over. The apartment represented starting fresh, but it also meant accepting that I was doing this alone. I took the keys and scheduled the move-in date for 2 weeks out, giving myself time to coordinate everything else that still needed handling. Thursday morning, I got the email from Ronan with an attachment labeled Preliminary Compliance Review. My hands shook as I opened the PDF and scanned through the formal language until I found the numbers.